So this is entirely a Twitter disagreement thing, but I'm really excited about it only because of what I fucking found while researching this. Because whenever I make fun of somebody on the internet, I do it because I think that I'm smarter than them. And that's every person ever. When you make fun of somebody on the internet, you're doing it because you think that you have some level of superiority over the person which you can laud against them. Everybody does this. This is standard. However, I also recognize that I am a goddamn idiot. I am a moron, an uneducated, fully autodidactical moron who doesn't know a whole lot about anything. So, as a result, when somebody throws something at me, I usually go into research mode. I think I'm correct and they are incorrect, but I usually go into research mode just to check myself before I wreck myself. So, okay. I made a video about this tweet a little while ago where Brianna Wu is saying, I hate transgender day of visibility because she fucking hates herself or some shit. Where she was like, oh yeah, coming out as trans was a bad idea. All trans people just want to pass and go under the radar, which is like not really 100% true. There's people who are non-binary who don't want to do that specifically. There's people who want to engage in activism and therefore want to be seen as visibly trans. There's people who take pride in themselves being trans specifically because they're told not to take pride in that and all this shit. And then, you know, of course, I, being an asshole, posted, I hate the day that normalizes what I am for people. What an idiot. And I'm willing to stand by that statement. I am. However, check this out. Check this out. So this person here, Lovesick Low, who I've never seen before, and she describes herself as a libertarian conservative trad wife and a follower of Christ. And, you know, like, I could spend a whole lot of time poking holes at that and fun at that, but I'm not going to because it's not really important. That would basically be poisoning the well here. But, okay. She responds by saying, you're not very bright, are you? Actual transsexuals want to pass as the opposite sex. They want to blend in. Okay, some of them. Some people who are trans want to. Not all of them. And even the ones who want to blend in, they don't necessarily want to cut the bridge out from behind them. They want to make it so that people can see them and go, oh my god, someone else could be like you, and use that as a reason to go and do their thing. Hell, I've had this experience myself, and I don't know what weird noise my nose just made. Did I snort? I don't know. Let me know in the comment section if I snorted. I don't know if I did or not, but that felt weird coming out of my mouth. But you did? Okay, cool. That I did. Neato. Anyway, so I've had this experience before, twice now. There is an artist who I've gotten a lot of work done for, Suzu Sawara, actually, the one who made this model, who saw me do VTubing with the model that Remixin made me, and then became a VTuber because they watched my content and saw that I was doing VTubing and went like, oh, cool, if he can do it, so can I. And, like, that ended up being such a cool experience for me when I met Suzu and went, oh, you were a fan who watched my stuff and then became a VTuber because I was doing VTubing, and now you're a friend who I commissioned for art, and I got to meet you because I saw your art on Twitter and I saw the models you were making and I wanted to reach out to you for a commission. It became a closed loop, and it wouldn't have happened if I had not been doing a thing that caused them to have that trigger. At least I don't know if it would have happened, but I'm going off what I was told. So, another thing, I've had a lot of trans people who have a lot of dysphoria in regards to their voice send me emails saying that my content actually helped them cope with their voice. Because obviously I'm a cis guy using a cartoon avatar, but the idea of somebody just having a voice that is very male coming out of a female avatar and then being exposed to that a lot helped normalize it for them as well. And you know what? Having seen those two things in general, the idea of the trans person who just wants to blend in, I respect that, but I don't think that the declarative statement that the real ones just want to blend in and then go stealth mode, I don't think that that is a fair assessment when you're declaring that everybody is wrong who does not do that, because I think that both types of people are valid. I think Brianna Wu is valid for not wanting to be seen as a trans woman, just wants to be seen as a woman, and I think that people who want to be seen as a trans person specifically and want to use that as a signal for others, I think that's also perfectly valid. But anyway, they said they don't want their mental illness to be highlighted and pointed out. First of all, being trans isn't a mental illness. It's actually not. We don't use being trans as a mental illness, I think, as of the DSM-4. Now, gender dysphoria can be considered a mental illness, but gender dysphoria itself is treated with HRT or gender-affirming care, and once it's mostly alleviated, like, that's no longer a thing you're dealing with. Anyway, said it's autogynephiles like yourself who need to wave your sexual fetish in everyone's face for your own sick self-fulfillment that want your disorder to be recognized. I know you claim not to be trans, but anyone with a functioning brain can tell based on your use of hypersexualized female avatars that you're a textbook autogynephile. So, okay. This means that this is a person who, at the very least, has seen some of my content, because they know that I'm not trans. Neato. But then saying I'm a textbook autogynephile, okay, put a pin in that. That's an interesting thing to claim, and you know what? I'm not gonna say that I do not find the avatars that I use attractive. I think that women are attractive, and my avatars are those of cute anime women in various garbs based on Thrall from World of Warcraft in one way, shape, or form. So, neat. You're a textbook autogynephile. And I said, hey, neat opinion. Care to back that up with a source? And she said, here's a simple graph explaining autogynephilia. For further understanding, I recommend using Blanchard's transsexual typology. Here's one paper published by Ray explaining it. I also lived several years of my life identifying under this trans umbrella. Your gender ideologies worship. First of all, ideologies don't worship people. Ideologies create something that people worship. Christian ideology does not worship. Christian ideology produces followers that worship Christ. So maybe get the way that you word things a little more straight before you come at me with authoritative bullshit. But anywho, I said I have some experience in the, quote, community. Neato. Okay, lovesick, low. Again, I don't know who you are. I'm not going to comment on your religion. I'm not going to comment on your looks. I'm not going to comment on you putting transphobic, hateful bigot in your bio. I'm not going to do any of that. I don't think that that's a good idea, but it is weird that you are followed by two people who I used to associate with for content's sake. So, okay, fair enough, whatever. So what do they mean, community? The trans community, likely. Anyway, so I actually did look at the article that you posted. I did go and take a look at that one from the Journals of Nervous and Mental Disease. And as I was trying to look at it, I went, hey, hold on, I don't know a whole lot about Ray Blanchard specifically, so why don't I go ahead and do a little digging into him, and let's see what I can find when I take a look there. And when I did that, I actually found something interesting. I came across another article here, which is called A Further Assessment of Blanchard's Typology of Homosexual versus Non-Homosexual Autogynephilic Gender Dysphoria. So I started, and people on stream were watching me fucking skim through this shit to try to see what was going on here. And by the time we made it to the end, I mean, this was something that was shown earlier in here as well, but let me make sure that I've got the right area specifically in here, because I know that I found it there. Here we are. Okay. So there was a finding in this study, which was an analysis on Ray's studies, which, by the way, the analysis was to say that the numbers that Ray found were largely correct. Ray Blanchard's studies on autogynephilia and definitions of autogynephilia, all of that could easily be fair and true and whatever. Okay, transvestic fetishism, which is autogynephilia, that's the word that's being used in this study to represent that for the most part, is not only a generational phenomenon, but a phenomenon disproportionately experienced among whites as compared to non-whites in North America. For American white male to females, the older generation in particular, the presentation of their gender identity by dressing in the female role was frequently highly secretive and an exotic phenomenon. And there's a study it's using for there as well. The exotic nature of feminine dressing, experienced more often by whites as compared to non-whites in our sample, may largely account for the higher levels of transvestic fetishism among the whites. Largely unknown developmental factors may partially account for transactive fetishism, but an adequate theory of this phenomenon must also account for the age cohort and ethnic differences observed in the study. Exotic becomes erotic theory of sexual orientation suggests that socially exotic behaviors and experiences may become eroticized because they are associated with generalized states of emotional and physiological arousal. There's a link into here as well from another paper from Shatter and Singer. The older generation of white MTFs included in this study may have developed transvestic fetishism in part because of the emotional arousal and sexual attributions associated with their socially exotic presentations of gender. So the reason that I wanted to take a look at that, the reason that I saw that and I wanted to immediately make a video, is what that means is that when you disparage trans women as a unit, right? When you push them further and further into the closet, when you create a world that largely wants them to pass and blend in, the world where you don't have transgender day of visibility, you don't have the normalization of these people, you are left with the exotic part of being trans. It is weird, it is strange, it is exotic, and therefore it is erotic, something that has been backed up by other studies. Anytime we see something that we think is exotic, it usually gets sexualized. Just think fucking random white men and Asian women, speaking as somebody who's dating a Japanese girl. Okay, what this means is that if somebody is using autogynephilia to disparage trans women and push them further and further into the closet, they are creating the exact world which would produce autogynephilic trans women. They want to use it as a disparaging term against people. They want to use it to dismiss somebody's transness, but in doing so, they actually increase the number of people who experience that feeling. And so we get a classic example where the conservative person is just concerned about you, but then creates all of the problems that created the issue. As an example, when we talk about the numbers for trans people and suicide, we're looking at numbers of like 43% of trans people have attempted suicide, which is an astronomically high number. But then when we look at the reasons why, a lot of it is social stigma. But then people use the trans suicide numbers to either make fun of trans people or argue that you shouldn't be trans because you have this higher chance of suicide. But that contributes to the social stigma that created the statistic for suicide in the first place. It is, in fact, yes, Senna, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You would not have these high suicide rates if you didn't have the people creating the stigma that made it in the first place, and then those people use those high suicide rates to try to further reinforce why the stigma is required. Same with the autogynephilia thing. You would not have the people being largely autogynephilic to the numbers that make you concerned if you were not creating the exact prerequisites in society that cause being trans to be considered exotic and not just a normal method of being a human being. But even then, all of this gets thrown out the fucking window when we realize something else. Autogynephilia is bullshit, and not it's bullshit in that it doesn't exist. I'm fully ready to say it exists, and there are people who experience it. Sure, a lot of studies that I've looked at confirm that. The ones I looked at for this video confirm that. However, that doesn't mean anything. Would you like to know why? 93% of cis women are autogynephiles. 93%. And check this out. There was a study done on this in 2009 on autogynephilia in women. The erotic interest in the thought or image of oneself as a woman has been described as a sexual interest for some male to female transsexuals. The term has not been applied, however, to natal women. To test the possibility that natal women also experience autogynephilia, an autogynephilia scale for women was created from items used to categorize MTFs as autogynephilic in other studies. A questionnaire that included the ASW was distributed to a sample of 51 professional women employed at an urban hospital. 29 29 completed questionnaires were returned for analysis. Now, that is a small quantitative study, but it is a decent qualitative study. By the common definition of ever having erotic arousal to the thought or image of oneself as a woman, which is what autogynephilia is, 93% of respondents would be classified as autogynephilic. Using a more rigorous definition of frequent arousal of multiple items, 28% would be classified as autogynephilic. The implications of these findings are discussed concerning the sexuality of women and the meaning of autogynephilia for MTFs, and there is more in this particular study if you would like to look. Oh, and by the way, the term autogynephilia was actually coined by Ray Blanchard himself, so it's his word. He's the guy who did it. I could delve into his politics and other shit if I wanted to, but I don't think that that's necessary because we already have everything we need here. When we're looking at this from a scientific perspective, we have all the evidence to show that people who dislike trans people create the world where autogynephilia happens in the numbers that they are concerned about. Their responses, their stigmatizations are the things that actually create the scenarios they are worried about in the first fucking place. And even if that wasn't the case, even in the world where that wasn't what was happening, autogynephilia is bullshit because cis women experience it too, and they experience it in such alarming numbers that it should be further investigated, right? Except nobody's gonna fucking do that because nobody cares about cis women when they talk about this because nobody is scrutinizing the gender of cis women. Oh, and if we're talking about raw numbers, so when Ray Blanchard did his studies, would you like to know what percentage of trans women had autogynephilia? And by autogynephilia, we're using the specific, they have ever experienced arousal at the idea of themselves as women. Would you like to know what that number looked like? Would you like to know what it was? 73%. It was 73%. Lower than cis women. If the criteria is ever, 73% versus 93%. How is that anything to panic about? How is that anything to care about? How is that anything that's even worth discussing anymore? Somebody was sexually aroused by the idea of themselves as themselves. Cool. The reason AGP, the reason autogynephilia is bullshit as an argument against trans people doesn't boil down to whether it's accurate or not. It boils down to the fact that it is a nothing number. It is an observation without anything to point to other than the society we live in and nothing more. Remember, when Blanchard studies were done 20 years ago, a lot of the people who were being looked at in those studies were older trans women, people who had grown up in the culture where being trans was considered so sexual, so erotic. But when you look at more modern studies on the phenomenon, the numbers go down. The reason why the numbers go down when you look at younger and younger trans women, being trans is more understood by society. It's less exotic now. The numbers suggest that the less exotic it is, the less erotic it is, and therefore the less likely of somebody having this terrible, terrible thing that you are arguing that they have, while 93% of cis women have the same damn fucking thing. Oh, and for the 28% number, if we wanted to be a little more stringent, though that doesn't mean we get more stringent with the trans women for some reason, but if you want to get super strict with the number, and we have the 28%, do we suddenly start investigating the 28% of cis women? Do we suddenly start scrutinizing them super hard and being like, why the fuck are you attracted to your own tits, bitch? No, we're not doing that, because that would be a thing an insane, stupid person does. And we're not insane, stupid people. But, you know, I think there are some people who are. That said, I do want to thank you. I do want to thank you, Lovesick Low. I will not be responding to your thing over here on Twitter, because outside of a handful of times, I don't want to contribute to Twitter's algorithms. I simply want to use Twitter as a tool, and that's about it. But I do want to thank you, because I would not have gone down this rabbit hole on stream. I would not have done this research on stream if you hadn't have prompted me to. If my arrogant ass that believes in my heart of hearts that I am smarter than the people I'm arguing with and therefore allows my narcissism to run rampant, if that person was not who he was and you did not trigger that person into acting that way, I would not have learned more about this than I knew yesterday. So thank you for prompting my education. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to educate myself, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to prove why any of your arguments are also bullshit. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitt, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.